They say weddings bring out the best in people, but what if it brings out the worst? Picture this. A warm September evening in a picture-perfect small town, white string lights swaying above a garden venue, the scent of roses in the air. Laughter, champagne glasses clinking, until a scream cuts through the music. Moments later, the bride lies sprawled in her gown, the silk-soaked crimson. The guests freeze, unable to comprehend what they're seeing, because the killer is still among them. And they weren't strangers, they were family. In Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, everyone knew Harper Lee. She was beautiful, successful, and marrying the town's most eligible bachelor. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, a day she dreamed about since she was a little girl. But before the night was over, Harper would be dead, still wearing her wedding dress. And the person responsible wasn't an intruder or a jealous ex. It was someone she had loved and trusted all her life. This is the story of a celebration turned into a crime scene, and the jealousy that lit the fuse. Harper Lee was the kind of woman people in Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, couldn't stop talking about. A vision of small-town glamour, she'd returned from college to run her mother's high-end bridal boutique, dressing half the brides in town. Her smile was the kind that made you feel special, her style, timeless. But beneath the charm was an ambition sharpened to a knife's edge. The groom, Mason Callahan, was Ridgeway's golden boy. Son of the town's mayor, he was athletic, well-spoken, and the heir to his family's real estate empire. He'd been the kind of high school quarterback girls wrote diary entries about. Then there was Evelyn Ward, the cousin who had grown up alongside Harper like a sister, until life took them down different roads. Evelyn wasn't the center of attention type. She had always been quieter, shadowed by Harper's shine. But she'd been there for Harper through every breakup, every crisis. What no one knew was that Evelyn had loved Mason first. Harper and Evelyn's relationship was complicated, affection mixed with a subtle undercurrent of rivalry. In their 20s, Evelyn introduced Mason to Harper at a charity gala. A month later, Harper was dating him. Friends noticed Evelyn pulling away, skipping girls' nights, and avoiding Mason's events. But at Harper's engagement party, she was there, smiling and toasting with champagne like nothing was wrong. What people didn't see was the way Evelyn's eyes followed Mason across the room, or the bitterness she tried to swallow when Harper flashed her diamond ring. The wedding day had been the town's event of the year. The ceremony was set in the Ridgeway Botanical Gardens, a venue Harper had dreamed about since she was a teenager. Evelyn stood just 2 rows back, clutching her bouquet, watching the couple exchange vows. To the crowd, Evelyn looked radiant in her pale blue bridesmaid dress. Inside, she was unraveling. Every smile Mason gave Harper felt like a knife twisting. Every whispered vow was salt in a wound she had nursed for years. When the reception began, the champagne flowed and laughter filled the air. But Evelyn wasn't drinking to celebrate, she was drinking to numb something far darker. It was during the couple's first dance, under the canopy of fairy lights, that Evelyn disappeared from the crowd. A few minutes later, she reappeared behind Harper, her hand concealed in the folds of her dress. Witnesses would later recall a blur of motion, a sudden gasp, and Harper crumpling to the floor. What could drive a woman to kill her own cousin on her wedding night? In Evelyn's mind, it wasn't just about Mason. It was about a lifetime of feeling second best, always in Harper's shadow. Mason had been her chance at something real, something that belonged to her. Harper had taken it like she took everything. To Evelyn, this wasn't just jealousy, it was justice twisted into something unrecognizable. The guests screamed, chaos erupting as people rushed toward the fallen bride. The music cut abruptly. Mason was on his knees, cradling Harper's head, his hands stained with her blood. In the confusion, Evelyn didn't run. She stood there, trembling as if in shock. It wasn't until someone noticed the knife slipping from her fingers that reality set in. The police arrived within minutes, their cruisers flashing lights painting the garden in red and blue. Officers led Evelyn away in handcuffs, her face pale but her eyes almost relieved. If you're gripped by this story already, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the rest of this chilling investigation. Before the flashing police lights and the blood on the dance floor, there was a little girl who always stood in the shadow of her cousin's spotlight. In a town like Ridgeway, where appearances were currency, Evelyn Ward learned early that she could be invisible while Harper Lee could not walk into a room without owning it. But envy has a way of growing quietly, like roots beneath the surface, until it's strong enough to crack the ground wide open. And on Harper's wedding night, the ground finally broke. Evelyn's childhood in Ridgeway was a world of neatly trimmed lawns, church bake sales, and Friday night football games. Her parents ran a modest hardware store, respected but far from glamorous. Harper's parents, on the other hand, owned Bridal, one of the most successful businesses in town, catering to women from Ridgeway and beyond. From the moment they could walk, the comparisons began. Harper had the beauty, the charm, and the dresses that came fresh from her mother's store. Evelyn had the hand-me-downs and the quiet, polite smile. Family members never meant to be cruel, but their words, "Harper's such a natural performer, Evelyn's the shy one," etched themselves into Evelyn's self-image. Despite the imbalance, the girls were inseparable in their early years. Harper was the leader, Evelyn the loyal sidekick. Harper picked the games, chose the Halloween costumes, and even decided which boys they'd marry in pretend weddings on the playground. Evelyn followed, always following. That dynamic didn't change in high school. Harper became prom queen. Evelyn decorated the gym for the dance. Harper was Mason Callahan's date for senior prom. Evelyn was home watching movies with her parents. But Evelyn had known Mason before Harper ever noticed him. They'd sat next to each other in sophomore chemistry, shared a laugh over a failed experiment, and exchanged texts about homework. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was hers. Until Harper. It happened fast. Evelyn invited Harper to a charity gala her job was sponsoring in Pittsburgh. Mason was there, attending with his father. Harper, in her silver gown, caught Mason's attention immediately. By the end of the night, Evelyn watched them laughing in the corner, their shoulders leaning closer than they should have. A month later, Harper announced she was casually seeing Mason. Evelyn smiled, said she was happy for her cousin, and went home to cry. That was the first cut, but it wasn't the last. Over the years, Evelyn dated other men, but none lasted. Mason and Harper's relationship weathered every storm. And every family gathering, every holiday dinner, Evelyn had to watch the man she once thought might be hers hold Harper's hand. The thing about jealousy is it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Evelyn told herself she had moved on, told herself she didn't care. But when Harper announced her engagement, something in Evelyn cracked. It wasn't just that Harper was marrying Mason, it was that Harper had everything. The thriving business, the attention, the life Evelyn had quietly wanted for herself. Evelyn had worked hard, played by the rules, and yet it was Harper who always ended up with the prize. By the time the wedding planning began, Evelyn wasn't just envious. She was consumed. In the weeks before the wedding, Evelyn began making small, almost unnoticeable moves. She offered to help with Harper's final dress fitting, at the boutique, surrounded by mirrors and lace. She watched Harper twirl, saw the joy in her face, and something inside her twisted tighter. There were little signs no one noticed then. Evelyn skipping her lunch breaks, losing weight, her eyes dark from lack of sleep. She began showing up at Mason's office under the pretense of dropping off paperwork for Harper. She lingered too long, her questions dipping into personal territory. Mason, ever polite, brushed it off. The night before the wedding, Evelyn stood in her apartment staring at herself in the mirror. The pale blue bridesmaid dress hung in the corner. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a kitchen knife, testing the weight of it in her hand. Later, she would tell police she hadn't decided then. But deep down she had. On the morning of the wedding, Evelyn smiled through hair and makeup. No one could have guessed what she was thinking. She posed for photos, helped Harper into her gown, adjusted the veil. Harper looked at her and said, "I'm so glad you're here with me, Ev. You're like my sister." The words landed like a blow. Evelyn smiled back, but her jaw ached from holding it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're here as we uncover how a lifetime of small cuts led to one deadly night. Harper Lee had everything, or at least that's what everyone in Ridgeway thought. To the outside world, she was the picture of small-town perfection. The dream job, the dream fiancé, the dream wedding. But perfection has a way of blinding you to the shadows at your back. Harper never saw Evelyn's envy creeping closer. And she never imagined that some of her own choices had quietly lit the fuse. Because in Ridgeway, secrets don't stay buried, they wait for the perfect moment to explode. Harper wasn't oblivious to her charm, but she didn't think of herself as cruel. She'd worked hard to turn Bridal into one of the most sought-after boutiques in the region. Brides traveled from 3 counties over to be fitted for gowns in her shop. She told herself she'd earned her success. After all, she had put in the hours, the late nights, the networking. When it came to Mason, Harper had no doubts. He was her anchor, her protector, the man who made her feel like no one else in the room mattered. The fact that Evelyn had introduced them was, in Harper's mind, just fate. She never asked Evelyn how she felt about it. She never thought she needed to. Harper loved Evelyn in her own way. She thought of her as family, as the person who'd always been there. But she didn't notice the little shifts. The way Evelyn's eyes seemed to follow Mason a little too long, or how her compliments often had sharp edges. When Harper announced her engagement, she was met with hugs, laughter, and tears. Evelyn hugged her too, but Harper noticed her cousin's hands were cold. She chalked it up to nerves or surprise. Harper had no idea those cold hands were holding something else. Resentment? 2 months before the wedding, Harper was in the boutique after hours, working on alterations for another bride, when Evelyn stopped by unexpectedly. She carried a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I thought we could celebrate," Evelyn said, setting the glasses down. They drank, laughed, and reminisced about childhood. But as the bottle emptied, Evelyn's tone shifted. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, "I always thought Mason and I would end up together." Harper laughed it off, thinking it was a joke. But when she looked up, Evelyn wasn't smiling. The moment passed quickly, Evelyn changing the subject, but it left a faint chill Harper couldn't quite shake. Harper had a habit of assuming everyone was happy for her, because why wouldn't they be? She didn't mean to be dismissive, but she didn't dwell on other people's feelings if they conflicted with her plans. When Evelyn began volunteering to help with wedding preparations, organizing the bridal shower, assisting with vendor calls, Harper saw it as support. What she didn't realize was that Evelyn was positioning herself closer to every detail of the big day, embedding herself in the inner circle. In the weeks after Harper's death, police pieced together a series of unsettling patterns. Evelyn had been visiting Mason at his office under casual pretenses. She had requested a seating chart change to place herself closer to the couple during the reception, and she had deleted a series of text messages the night before the wedding. To Harper, these moments had meant nothing. She was focused on her own checklist: the flowers, the photographer, the perfect playlist for the first dance. But Evelyn had been focused on something else entirely: an ending, not a beginning. On the morning of September 14th, Harper woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. She'd slept poorly but told herself it was wedding jitters. Evelyn arrived early with coffee, smiling brightly. "You ready for the best day of your life?" Evelyn asked. Harper grinned. "Absolutely." She had no idea those would be some of her last words to her cousin. Stay with this story, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're here as we uncover the moments that turn celebration into tragedy. A wedding reception is supposed to be a fairy tale: music, laughter, champagne flowing like water. But that night in Ridgeway, the fairy tale was an illusion. Beneath the glow of the string lights, one guest wasn't celebrating. She was counting down the moments until she would take everything from the bride: her joy, her love, her life. And no one noticed the danger walking among them, not until it was too late. The reception was in full swing at the Ridgeway Botanical Gardens, a venue draped in roses and bathed in warm golden light. Harper was radiant, her satin gown flowing around her as she danced with Mason to their chosen song, At Last. Evelyn stood at the edge of the dance floor, drink in hand, watching. To the other guests, she looked like any other bridesmaid enjoying the moment. But inside, Evelyn's thoughts were far from celebratory. She had rehearsed this in her mind, not the speech she'd given earlier at the reception, but the final act that was coming. In photographs from that night, Evelyn is often in the background. Sometimes she's smiling. Sometimes her eyes are locked on Harper and Mason in a way that, looking back, feels almost predatory. Mason, oblivious, was caught up in the moment. He didn't notice Evelyn slipping away from the crowd. Harper didn't either. She was spinning, laughing, the train of her gown brushing the polished wooden floor. Around 8:47 p.m., Evelyn walked into the catering tent. She told a staff member she needed a quiet moment to fix her dress, and stepped behind the curtained area where utensils and backup supplies were stored. Inside her clutch, she had slipped the kitchen knife she'd brought from home, wrapped in a cloth napkin. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. She stood there for almost a full minute, listening to the muffled sound of music outside, before she slipped the knife into the folds of her bridesmaid dress. When she re-emerged, she scanned the crowd, her gaze fixing on Harper. The first dance had been the last straw. Watching Mason's hand on Harper's waist, the tenderness in his eyes, it was unbearable. Evelyn told herself she was taking back what should have been hers. To her twisted logic, this was balance. It wasn't just about Mason anymore. It was about making sure Harper never walked away victorious again. It was 9:03 p.m. when it happened. Guests had formed a loose circle around the dance floor as Harper moved through the crowd, laughing and greeting friends. Evelyn approached from behind, her steps slow, deliberate. No one saw the blade until it was too late. Witnesses later described a quick, sharp motion, Harper's sudden gasp, and the way her hand flew to her abdomen, clutching at the spreading stain on her gown. The music cut abruptly. Mason's voice broke the silence. "Harper." As he caught her, lowering her to the ground. Her bouquet fell from her hand, roses scattering across the floor. Evelyn stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Some guests thought she was in shock too, until the knife clattered to the floor beside her. Screams erupted. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Mason pressed his hands over the wound, his tuxedo jacket soaking through with blood. Harper's lips moved faintly, her eyes glassy, but no one could make out her words. Evelyn didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply stood there as if she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. When the police arrived minutes later, they found her still in place, her pale blue dress streaked with red where Harper's blood had brushed against her. Officers cuffed her without resistance. As paramedics rushed Harper away, the reception hall stood eerily quiet except for the sobbing of family members. Mason's hands were stained crimson, his face blank with shock. Later, when investigators pieced together the night, they would realize how deliberate it had been. Evelyn had chosen a moment when Harper was surrounded by people, making it a statement as much as an attack. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of intention. Don't miss the rest of this story. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're here as we follow the investigation into one of Ridgeway's most shocking crimes. In Ridgeway, even the most perfect mornings carry shadows. But this one was different. The Ridgeway Gazette didn't need bold headlines. The whispers had already spread faster than ink. By sunrise, everyone knew Harper Calloway had been killed in her wedding dress. And the killer wasn't a stranger. She'd been standing at the altar just a few feet away. The morning after Harper's murder, the Ridgeway Botanical Gardens was unrecognizable. The twinkling lights still hung over the reception lawn, but the dance floor was empty now, stained with a darkness no amount of bleach could erase. Half-drunk champagne glasses sat abandoned on tables, white tablecloths littered with petals from bouquets that would never be claimed. Detective Laura Vance stood at the center of it all, a notebook in one hand, the other brushing away strands of auburn hair as the early light broke through the glass conservatory roof. The case was only hours old, but the whole town was already watching her every move. 36 witnesses, her partner muttered as he flipped through the initial statements. And yet no one saw it coming. Vance's gaze swept across the remnants of the celebration. They didn't want to see it coming, she said flatly. That's how things work in Ridgeway. A few miles away, Evelyn sat in a narrow, pale green interrogation room at the Ridgeway Police Department. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly, illuminating the still crumpled folds of her bridesmaid's dress. She hadn't changed. She hadn't asked to. She just sat with her hands folded neatly on the table, as if she were waiting for someone to serve her tea instead of murder charges. When Detective Vance walked in, Evelyn's eyes flicked up but didn't linger. "Do you know why you're here?" Vance asked, taking the chair opposite her. "You tell me," Evelyn replied, her voice steady. Vance leaned forward. "You stabbed your cousin, Harper Calloway, in the middle of her wedding reception. In front of dozens of witnesses. Some would call that pretty open and shut." Evelyn tilted her head as though she were considering the phrasing. "Some might. But some might also ask why." Vance wasn't new to people trying to play mind games in that room. But there was something in Evelyn's tone, cool, almost academic, that made her think the motive wasn't simple rage. It was something else. Meanwhile, Mason Calloway sat slumped on the couch in his parents' living room, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. His tuxedo jacket had been taken from him at the hospital the night before, but his shirt still bore faint brown stains where the blood had seeped through. His mother perched beside him, eyes red from crying. "You should eat something," she urged softly. He didn't answer. What he kept replaying wasn't just the moment Harper fell, it was Evelyn's face in that moment. Not panicked, not shocked, just still. As if she'd been standing on the edge of a cliff for years and had finally jumped. Back at the station, Evelyn's interview was just beginning to turn. "You know, Mason loved her," Vance said, watching Evelyn closely. A flicker of something, bitterness maybe, passed through Evelyn's eyes. "Mason loved the idea of her," she said quietly. "Just like everyone else did. Is that why you did it?" Vance pressed. "Because he chose her instead of you?" For the first time, Evelyn laughed. It wasn't a long laugh, just a short, sharp sound that didn't match the tension in the room. "Detective," she said, leaning forward, "you think this was about a man?" Vance paused. "Wasn't it?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "If it were that simple, you'd already have your neat little headline. But Ridgeway isn't neat. Not under the surface." By late afternoon, word had spread beyond Ridgeway's borders. News vans lined the street outside the police department, satellite dishes pointed toward the clouds. Reporters from nearby cities flocked in, hungry for the story of the glamorous small-town wedding turned homicide. On Main Street, boutique owners whispered behind the counters, their eyes darting to the door every time it opened. Everyone had a theory, jealousy, revenge, an old family feud, but no one had the whole truth. And Evelyn seemed in no hurry to give it to them. Detective Vance's team combed through Harper's phone records, financial accounts, and personal messages. That's when they found it, a string of encrypted texts between Harper and someone listed only as A. The messages were short but suggestive: meetings late at night, unfinished business, and one sent just 3 days before the wedding. She doesn't know yet. Vance stared at the screen. Find out who A is, she ordered. Because if Evelyn wasn't lying and if this wasn't about Mason, then Ridgeway's golden wedding had just cracked open into something far more complicated. Stay subscribed and hit the notification bell. This investigation is about to pull Ridgeway's deepest secrets into the light. By the time dusk settled over Ridgeway, the wedding flowers had started to wilt, but the questions hadn't. Evelyn was in custody. Harper was gone. And somewhere in the quiet corners of town, the truth, ugly, tangled, and years in the making, was waiting to be found. Detective Laura Vance had learned long ago that in small towns, the truth rarely lived where you expected. It hid in gossip, in old grudges, in the pauses between what people said and what they meant. And Ridgeway was already speaking to her, just not in words. At the station, the encrypted messages from A had become her obsession. Whoever this person was, they had been meeting Harper in secret in the weeks before the wedding. The text hinted at something dangerous, but the most chilling part was the last one, sent less than an hour before Harper's death. Not much time. Tell her tonight. Vance stared at the name A glowing on the screen, her mind working through possibilities. She'd already had her team run the number. It came back to a prepaid phone purchased in a strip mall 2 towns over. No name, no address. Mason Calloway, meanwhile, sat in a quiet interview room, different from the one holding Evelyn. He looked hollow, like he'd been scraped clean of anything resembling the man in those wedding photos. His hands shook as he spoke. I didn't know about the messages, he said. Harper never mentioned anything. She was stressed about the wedding, but I thought that was normal. Did she have enemies? Vance asked. Enemies? Mason gave a bitter laugh. Not until she married me, apparently. Across the hall, Evelyn was still unreadable. She hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't tried to negotiate. She sat in the same pale green interrogation room as before, her hands neatly folded. Vance walked in holding a printout of the messages. Who's Evelyn? Evelyn's gaze dropped to the paper for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. You think I know? She said. I think you know more than you're letting on. Evelyn's lips curved into a smile so faint it was almost invisible. If I told you, it wouldn't be my secret anymore. By the next morning, Vance's team traced the prepaid phone to a grainy security camera still. The buyer wore a baseball cap pulled low, but the jawline was familiar. When Vance enlarged the image, the pieces began to slide into place like teeth in a trap. It wasn't Evelyn. It wasn't Mason. It was Allison Firth, Harper's former best friend, who'd moved out of Ridgeway 2 years earlier after a mysterious falling out. The same Allison who had been spotted briefly at the reception, hovering near the back of the crowd, then disappearing before anyone could speak to her. Vance confronted Evelyn with the photo. That's Allison, Evelyn said simply. I told Harper she shouldn't trust her. I told her. So you admit you knew she was in town? I knew a lot of things, Evelyn replied, her voice sharp now. I knew Harper was keeping something from Mason. I knew she'd been lying for months. And I knew that if the truth came out, it would destroy her perfect little life. Vance studied her. So you destroyed it first. Evelyn didn't answer. But the silence was louder than words. The coroner's report came in that afternoon. Harper's cause of death wasn't a single stab wound. It was a combination of the wound and a fast-acting toxin found in her bloodstream. The champagne she drank before the attack had been laced. Changed everything. Evelyn might have delivered the killing blow, but someone else had set the stage. The double narrative of the crime began to form. Allison, the ghost from Harper's past, had poisoned her drink. Evelyn, driven by her own festering jealousy, had stabbed her before the poison could finish its work. Neither woman had known about the other's plan, but fate, or cruelty, had put them on a collision course at Harper's wedding. When Vance finally left the station that night, Ridgeway was cloaked in the soft glow of its street lamps. The Gazette's front page in the corner newsstand still carried Harper's smiling bridal portrait. To the town, she would always be frozen in that moment, beautiful, glowing, seconds away from tragedy. And to Vance, the case was no longer about who killed Harper Calloway. It was about how many people had wanted to. 2 women. 2 murder plots. 1 victim in a wedding dress. Ridgeway will never be the same, but neither will you once you realize how deep jealousy can run. Whose crime do you think was worse, Evelyn's final act or Allison's poison? Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like this so more people can join the conversation.